Hi everyone, welcome to part 3 of the Tiny Illustration Project. I engraved a can for my uncle and aunt's 30th wedding anniversary and I fill it with tiny illustrations. If you haven't seen the previous parts yet, I recommend doing that first. I'll put a link in the description for you. For the first one of this video, I start with a house portrait. I never did a house portrait like this before, but I like the look of them when I see similar artworks of other people. I found a reference photo of a colorful row of houses on the website Unsplash and I isolated this yellow one in Photoshop. I printed it on just regular printer paper and I used that to measure out my drawing. There's no specific reason why I drew a house portrait, unlike the cassette tape from part 1 and the spider from part 2. I just wanted to do it and that's totally fine. Actually, I enjoyed making this illustration so much I want to make a whole series of little houses. What do you think? Would you watch me drawing house portraits like this? When the line drawing was complete, I added watercolor on top. I thought it was nice to add a bit of blue sky. If I thought about that earlier on in the drawing process, I would have placed the house a bit lower on the paper, because now the illustration looks a bit off-centered, but it's fine. A lesson for next time. I used the print purely as reference. I didn't want to copy it completely. It's not a portrait of a specific house that has a meaning for me or my uncle and aunt, so I used a bit of artistic license by adding some greenery on the sidewalk, and I didn't want to stress about matching the colors completely. And after some final details with ink on top, this little house portrait was finished. This turned out really cute and I think this would be a nice idea for a greeting card for someone who just moved to a new place. For the second illustration, I'm drawing a key in an old door with a dip pen and sepia ink on hot pressed watercolor paper. I like to make these ink drawings on watercolor paper in case I want to add some ink wash on top. I mostly used hatching and some cross hatching in certain areas. I went a bit crazy on the wood texture, but I think it suits the subject. When I saw that reference photo, I just knew I had to draw it, and this turned out as one of my favorite illustrations of the whole project. The use of sepia ink in this pen and ink drawing just gives it that vintage look I like so much. wanted to distinguish the metal lock from the wooden door, so I changed the hatch mark slightly. Some people can make beautiful drawings by only using pen, but for some reason I have to add inkwashes on top to make it stand out. But it's fine, it's all about the end result. So I gave it a light wash of ink in some areas, but I left the strongest highlights blank. And I think this one turned out really nice. As I said already, this is one of my favorite illustrations of the whole bunch. For the next one, I'm painting a landscape. This was actually my 4th attempt. I came across a tutorial for beginners on YouTube on how to paint an abstract landscape in less than 15 minutes. I don't know what I did wrong, but the first 2 tries looked more like I'd sneezed very hard on the paper instead of a landscape. Maybe because these Cotman watercolors are student grade paints, or because my paper isn't 100% cotton, but for me it wasn't exactly beginner friendly, although it looked very easy. After those 2 attempts I thought I'd try it one more time, but I'd do it my own way. And that's when it started to look like something. But I still wasn't quite happy about it, so I analyzed my work and I thought about what I wanted to do different, and this 4th try is now what you see in the video. In the end it looked nothing like the painting in the tutorial. In the tutorial everything was done with the wet in wet technique, but I let all the layers dry in between. Also the composition is a bit different. I left out the lake and I added some birds in the sky for some additional interest. The final painting still looks quite simple and it's different than what I usually make. But when the whole project was done and I asked some people which of the 15 illustrations they liked the most, some actually said that this one was one of their favorites. That surprised me because for a moment I didn't know if I wanted to add this one to the can. But it's growing on me. That happens sometimes. It's not always love at first sight, but in the end, I'm glad I kept the painting to add it to the can. For the next one, I made a detail painting of a corn cob. My aunt likes cooking and baking. When I was young, my sister and I regularly stayed for a couple of days with them. Then we often baked cookies together. Although we always had a lot of fun, my aunt was also very strict. We weren't allowed to leave the table until we finished our dinner. Anyway, when I think about my uncle and aunt, I think about food. And now the corn is ready. Which illustration of this video is your favorite? The next and final part of this series contains my personal favorites, so stay tuned for that. Have a nice day, until next time.